That's it? Right here. The nice thing about doing this tour in September is it's still light, and I don't have to go running around finding the lights. And this is a great example of the Manueline style that we saw in Lisbon in terms of the ribbed vaulting and other decoration. But I'd like to just mention to you that this had a very specific purpose in the monastery. This was a chapter room. And I'm wondering if anybody knows what that means, the chapter room. Does anybody know? Okay. The daily life of the monastery revolved around work and prayer. Okay? And the prayer took place in the church that you would access right through that wall where we had dinner last night. That wall would have connected to, and if you take a look back there, you can see the church next door that some of you visited with the tile work. The Church of St. John the Evangelist was right there. And in fact, you went down steps and into the church, which is at this level. So all monasteries were laid out essentially the same. A church that had a public access, but also private access. So the monks could go throughout the night, every few hours to do their prayers, come through a cloister, and this open courtyard space is called the cloister, to the refectory for their meals, and that's a room back there that we might be able to see. But before that, every morning after their morning mass, they would come here to the chapter room. And what happened in the chapter room is the head of the monastery, the abbey, would read a chapter of the book of the order of monks. So for the Cistercian, Benedictine, Franciscan, all had the tenets of their order, the mission statement, so to speak, the objectives, what the monks were there to do in the Franciscan order, or the Cistercian, or the Benedictine, or whichever. And that chapter would be selected, and the monks would be sitting where Petra and Carl and Joyce are, and Juan, and yes, where are you all? And after that, what would happen? The monks would confess their sins, Petra. They would look pretty much like that. And the abbey would say, Petra, what have you sinned? How have you sinned in the last 24 hours? And Petra is going blank. She's not saying a word. But they would go around. So it was a public confession.
I'll tell you later.
Okay. So I know she's done something.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So that would take place. Also, there would be an accounting if there were financial matters to be taken care of. Because, of course, the monastery was an organization taking money in, paying money out, etc. And then there would be other issues addressed. For example, if the monks were drinking too much wine, if there wasn't enough heat in the room where the monks who were transcribing manuscripts were working, those were the monks who got heat in the winter. If you were in a monastery where you were transcribing. Otherwise, you just put on more layers of clothing. So those kind of issues would be held every day here. Okay. And then you would go to the refectory for your meal. And the refectory is behind there, and sometimes we can get into it and sometimes not. I should just mention that you have these beautiful medallions that are polychromed or painted on these. Some of these moldings are done in that rope-like fashion. You also have two horseshoe arches, courtesy of Visigoths, by way of the Islamic builders. And we have three alabaster twisted arches on these really great pedestal columns, these kind of series of star-like shapes on the base. and very different capitals, not Doric, not Ionic, not Corinthian. These are more in the Romanesque style. Romanesque style created new and different kinds of capitals, taking advantage of the skill of the stonemasons and their creativity and symmetry and matching. Those kind of issues were not important. Important was the creativity. When we go outside into the cloister, and again, the cloister was a connecting place in the series of buildings. And the cloister would also be a place where monks could walk around and pace and say their prayers. The way we got, by the way, the idea of cloister meaning a quiet or silent order of nuns or priests is that monks were silent with the exception of official business, like confession or holding meetings. So the idea, the word we use today, that's a cloistered order, meaning they're silent, came from the architectural term cloister. Chapter, this is called the chapter room. In the United States, orders of nuns have things called chapter houses, and that's where the headquarters of that order of nuns is located. But they call it a chapter house, and it comes from the concept of that book that dictates what that order of monks or nuns was to be about. So the cloister connected the church to the chapter room, to the sleeping rooms or the cells above, to the workrooms, and to the refectory. Now, I'm going to sneak around here and see if we can, let's see if we can see the refectory.
Okay, look at this. So is that a painting that they left, or?
Oh yes, that's a fragment of frescoed walls. And as some of you may know from visiting Italy and Tuscany, often the cloister areas and other areas of monasteries were often frescoed, and there's a little section here of a fresco up there. Okay, will they let us come into the... Great. Go up and speak from the pulpit.
Right.
Well, this was part of the refectory. It has been redone with these medieval light fixtures, the painted ribs and the medallions, but the ribbing would have been there as the medallions would. But what's here, and if you take a look here, you'll see a little staircase going up. Petra wants to sing some more, she can go up there and pretend to be the abbey. And what would that purpose be?
To speak.
To speak. So the monks would be in silence here. They ate in silence. However, the abbey would go up the steps and would say the blessing, would give other announcements, etc. While the long refectory tables were here, and those big, perhaps one that very long one we saw upstairs might be here. Over in the university, they actually had them in marble, and there was that big fountain where the students washed their hands. Often there was a fountain like that in the monastery as well. I don't believe there's evidence of one here, but there is actually a little fountain out here in the corner. Did you see that? There's not one outside the store, but there is one out here. And that may have served that purpose as well. So you have this great construction here with the staircase, and I think this is just, perfect that they've been able to retain this. Let me see. What do I have to order on? It just went out of my head into the sea. Not the Cistercian. Carpathian. Yeah. It'll come back to me. In any event, as you may know, throughout the history, monasteries and monks had a very tumultuous ride, if you will. Why? And some of you may or may not, I don't know how many of you were raised in the Catholic Church or know about Catholic history, but monks were priests, were ordained priests, but they weren't priests in terms of a priest might have a parish. Priests were on the track to bishop, archbishop, bishop, archbishop, cardinal, pope, etc. Monks dedicated themselves to a life of working prayer in a time when the other branch of the clergy was more